Hi, we're about to start the review and critique for your best shot project. I'll be going through them and attempting to show you how I would perform some of the comments that I made, some of the critiques I made in the feedback on your grading thing. So hopefully this will help you and it will let you see how some of these things are done in Photoshop. For this particular critique, I don't know if we can do all of them this way. I'm going to try to get through all 12 of these projects that were turned in one module. You can stop and start it or review it however you want to since it's on video. So with that, let's get underway. Here's our first shot. We have a dog coming up out of some weeds or whatever onto a trail. A couple of issues with this. Number one, the shot looks like when you resized it, you only squeezed it rather than bring it out to where it should be. So I would suggest you go back and check and make sure when you do an image size. Let's go image size. When you get into this part, when you're doing the width and height, make sure that this lock is on. If it's off, if you're not seeing these brackets, when you change one part, it does not allow the other part to adjust. In this case, I'm going to do that on purpose and attempt to bring this out and see if this is going to help us. So I'm going to double this for right now. That left the height alone. We'll say okay. Yeah, that was a little too much. So let's go back and try this one more time with maybe the right setting. We'll try about half that, maybe a little bit less. Let's go 1300. Okay, that's a little better. So again, when you're doing that, when you're doing the resizing, make sure that you click on this and you've got these little brackets like this so that when you adjust one, the other one automatically adjusts to compensate for it. Okay. So now we can look at this and decide, well, your real shot is right here with the dog. The rest of this is just fluff and environment. So what I would do is simply crop it. And we'll use the cropping tool. Let's come in and whenever you're cropping on something with a lot of natural movement in one direction, like the dog running this way, give them a little extra room in front of them. Otherwise, if you did this kind of thing, it's going to make them look like they're running into this wall. So give them some room to move. We'll call that good. Now what I'm going to do is just use the burning tool. I'm going to set it down fairly low. Create a nice big soft brush. I'm going to darken some of this around him so that the dog stands out a little better. It's pretty subtle. I'm going to show you in another print a better way to do this burning or dodging. The problem with it, this really was designed to work well in grayscale, but as you can see, it really made a color difference to this ground. It turned it into this kind of awkward color. So using just the burning and dodging tool is frequently not a good way to do this. But it's fast, it's quick, sometimes it works pretty well. I'll show you a better one later. But by cropping now we've got a much better view of this dog and the shot works out a little better. But again, pay really careful attention to how you're resizing things. Okay, let's go on. Well, here we have a nice location portrait. of this young lady, I would do something very similar to what I did with the previous one. Is I'm going to crop it. Your shot is here in her face with the blowing hair. This background is interesting all on its own, but that means it potentially is a little distracting to her. Some of these kind of frenetic lines pick up the sense of the hair blowing in her face, so maybe we can leave some of this. But here's your shot. All of the rest of this, whatever the megapixel size of your camera is, the actual shot area, let's say it's maybe in, this upright's kind of distracting, so I'm going to get rid of it. Come in a little bit more. Now, all of this material around here is basically wasted pixels. Whatever the resolution of your camera is, you've now cut it in a third in terms of the image that you're going to save. So let's save this. We're going to try to bring this highlight on our t-shirt down a little bit. And so I'm going to show you how to do a layer and a layer mask to make this work. To create a duplicate layer, let's come over here to the layers palette. I'm going to grab this layer, pull it down to this new layer icon, and I've now got two layers here. Whenever you have two layers, there are two things to look for. One is the little eyeball over here. The eyeball is showing the layers that you can see, and you will always be looking at the top layer that has an eyeball on it. So right now you're looking at this layer. But over here, this is highlighted. If we click here, now this layer is highlighted. We're still looking here because the eyeball is on the top layer. But now we would be working on this layer. Obvious question is, why would you do that? Well, when we get into some more serious editing, you'll see. That's a really powerful tool for us. But for right now, I want to do something to this bottom layer. What I want to do is darken it so that I can bring in some of the texture on her shirt and around her. So I'm just going to go over to Image Adjustments. And I'm going to do this really simply right now with the levels adjustments. And I'm going to bring this down, see if I can bring some of this, a little more information into her shirt. Now the rest of it's getting too dark, but I don't care, because I'm not worried about that. I'll say okay. I'm now going to come up to this top layer, click the eyeball back on, and now you can see over here, here's my darken layer, here is my top layer. What I want to do is erase through so I can see some of this bottom layer. But I'm also going to make a change, just to help us a little. When I darkened it, we really started to warm this up a little. And I want to fix that. So remember in our global issues when we were talking about global color, our first thing was the photo filter. Well, I'm going to want a cooling filter. There we are. We're pretty much back to white. We'll say okay. Now I'm going to go to this top one, turn it on, and simply erase through to here. So I come over, get my eraser tool. I want to set this way down. I want to build up to the effect I want. So I'm going to set the opacity down around 21%. I want a big, very soft brush. And now with multiple hits, I can start bringing that darker background back in. And now we've got some texture in that t-shirt. We've eliminated a lot of the distracting stuff, and we've really concentrated on the face and the blowing hair. So now all we would have to do is flatten this. And we'd go layer, flatten image, and we're done. So we can move on to the next one. And here we have another really interesting little location portrait. Cute smile on her. This is nice. There's not much I would do. I think the composition works, but I might brighten it up just a little bit. It looks a little bit dull. Whenever I'm going to do something like that, just so I've got some place to get back to easily, I'm going to make another duplicate layer. Now I can do it like I did the other one. I can grab this, drag it down on top of this new layer icon, and that will make my duplicate layer. But I can also do it simply by pressing Control or Command on a Mac, J, and that creates a duplicate layer. So that way if I get a little crazy with this one, we can always get back. So I'm going to go into Image, Adjustments, and this time I'm going to go to Curves. And here is an example of this digital curve. Well, I'm going to turn this into something that looks more like a film curve. For those of you that had the original film class, and now if we go over here to the preview button, turn it on and off, you can see what that little bit of curve adjustment did. It took it from this kind of grayish thing to something with considerably more vibrance to it, a little better bit of contrast and dynamic range. It's subtle, but it's something we can do. And now I'm going to go ahead and flatten this. Say Layer, Flatten Image. And now I'll show you the proper way to do a vignette. I'm going to make a duplicate layer. I'm going to tell this top layer to multiply, which basically will take it down about a stop. So now I've got this top layer is my dark multiply layer. The bottom layer is the original. I'm going to make this into a layer mask by coming over and picking on this icon down here. Now, I could have simply erased through like we did on that last one, but the problem with that is if I make a mistake, I've got to go back and undo everything to the point where I made a mistake and start over. In this case, I don't have to do this. I've got a white layer mask, which means I need to use the opposite color, a black brush. And now you can see over on this layer mask, this darkened area is where I have lightened it. If I didn't like what I've done, I can simply switch colors back to white and let it go dark again. So I'm going to put a little bit back in her address. And you can see again over here how cool this is, all the power we've got to selectively lighten and darken areas in our shot. This is really the best way to do burning and dodging. So we'd go in and flatten this layer, flatten image, and we're done. Ready to move on to the next one. Here we have a little black kitty cat hiding out in the flowers or the garden or whatever. This is a tough issue. You've got a black cat, and on its face, which is normally the part we want to look at, that's the part that's hidden in shadow, so it's the darkest of all. And everything around it is much lighter. Generally speaking, our eyes are going to be drawn to the lighter areas of an image. Either a color that's very different on its own, or something that's light and stands out. So the first thing I'm going to do is do what we did to the others. I'm going to crop this down to where the image really is where the real image is, which is the kitty. And now let's see what we can do to bring that face out. But the first thing I'm going to do is do kind of a natural vignette to darken this background. So again, we make a layer mask. We turn this layer into a multiply layer. See what it did to this background? And this time I'm going to show you another way to do this. I'm going to hold the Alt key down while I click this layer mask tool. And what you can see is this now looks like the original, even though it's got a layer mask. But unlike the last one where the mask was white, this mask is black. So now if I use a white brush, I can start revealing that background. Now, if I wanted that background to go even darker, all I have to do is duplicate this layer. Whenever you duplicate a layer, you duplicate everything about that layer, including the mask. So things went darker. But because in this black area I did not do anything, the kitty's face hasn't gotten any darker, even though the rest of it has. So let's flatten this. Now we're going to make another duplicate layer, and this time we're going to lighten the kitty a little. So instead of a multiply, I'm going to have it make a screen layer. Screen layers will lighten the layer about a stop, roughly. And you can already see there's more detail back in the kitty's face than we had before. So we'll do, again, a layer mask. And now, what I want to do is I can just use a black brush, bring this down, leave the face alone. And now I've got one where I can see the cat's face a little better, and I've also concentrated more on the cat itself. So, took a little doing, but we made this work pretty well. Okay, so we'd go and we'd flatten the layer, because we're done. And we're done. Let's go on to the next one. Well, here we have a really dramatic skyline shot. Now, I would do exactly what we did with the cat, but in the two different areas. I would darken this light area quite a bit. And maybe lighten the foreground. The sky is really pretty dramatic. So we may not want to do much, if anything, with that, but we could bring a little of the cityscape back. So let's see if we can do that easily. Let's go down here. We'll make this a screen layer. See if there's anything there. Oh yeah, man, look at all that stuff. Look at all that stuff. So now we want to bring the sky back down. And here I need to make, I can either just do this freehand. I can come in and burn this down. Let me get a little bigger brush. And let it kind of softly blend around there. Now again, if you look at this icon over here, you can see where we brought the sky back. This is almost like a graduated filter, except we can work around things like the buildings and stuff like that. So that works really pretty well. Now, remember I said that we have these two layers. And we can work on them independently. So if I leave the eyeball on this one, but I come down and I activate this bottom layer. So it's got the highlight. This is the layer I'm working on, the background layer, which happens to be the layer with the sky in it. So suppose we go in here now to our image adjustments, and just to show you what I'm talking about, I'm just going to use exposure. This isn't something I use a lot, but we can make it work for here. I can now bring that sky down without affecting the foreground very much. So we can now really enhance this shot. We can play with these two parts independently because of the way the layer functions work. This is incredibly powerful. Most of the main advanced editing is done using this function. Okay, so let's move on. Now here we have a really nice shot of this incredibly complex architecture in this church. The only thing I would do is use our little trick to bring down this highlight a little bit, because it's beginning to get washed out. It's where the sun is coming through the upper windows, the upper windowed areas. And so again, this would be incredibly easy to do. We make a duplicate layer. We come down on our bottom layer and we darken it. To see what we can do. Let's see if we can actually bring some detail into there. Oh yeah, look at all that detail up there. Okay. Now, I'll go back to my top layer. Make it a layer mask. It's a white mask, so I need a black brush. Very soft. And I can now put a lot of that detail back so you can see it more readily. Very simple fix. This is a very, very nice shot of this church wall. Well, here we have a nice shot, a magical view into another world, another realm. I don't know whether this is a mirror or whether it's a porthole into another room, but the effect is much the same. Very clever shot. Good seeing. The only thing I would do is get rid of some of this foreground that isn't doing much for you. We need enough to establish that this is a window or a mirror into that world, but that's really all we need. And there's no reason we can't center this a little better. There's no major movement except some implied by the direction we're looking through this sill that's around it, the frame that's around it. But by removing a little bit of that outside, we can still maintain that it's a wall and yet look through it into this new realm. This is very, very nicely done. And what's really clever about this is you've got multiple reflections. This is an almost cubistic idea of seeing different sides of things all at the same time. Very clever. Nicely done. Very nice flower. Good use of depth of field. Again, the only thing I would do to this, your exposure is dead on. For all of it, is I would crop a little of this. Here's your main subject. This is it, this flower in here. So let's get rid of a little bit, not all of it. We want some of that background to give it some space, to give it some location. But with this, now we can get a sense of the main flower. The rest of it is just support material like it should be. So this lets us concentrate where we should. Very nice shot. Very good job. Interesting. Outdoor portrait, except we've almost lost the main subject in it. She's looking at something in the sky, looking up at that. There must be something fascinating. We don't know what it is. Maybe she's in a trance. Maybe she's a zombie. Who knows? But it would be nice to have a little more detail in her to stand out. So I think I would simply lighten her a little bit, and then we'll see if we want to do anything with that sky. So let's come down. We'll make our duplicate layer. We'll do a screen. Oh yeah, look at all of that information in there. Screen layer of her. We're going to do an inverted mask. So we come down to the new layer mask, hold down the Alt key, click on that, we get our black layer mask, which means we need to use a white brush. We really want this to be subtle. So I'm going to knock this down quite a bit. All right. So there we go. That helps that a lot. At the moment, I'm going to leave the sky. We could do other stuff with the sky if we wanted, but for now, let's just leave it. It is an evening sky. It kind of explains the lighting on her. So we'll move on. Interesting concept you did here. Minimal work to make it a little better. Oh, this is interesting. We have some wilting roses. They haven't totally wilted, but they're in the process of it. We've got a bunch of them, though part of our issue is there a focal point to this? Is there a single place that your eye tends to say, that's the subject, and the rest of it is supporting? Whenever you're shooting something like this, you need to look around the shot and make a decision. Where is the photograph? Is it here? Is it this rose? Is it this one? Let's hope not, because it's not in focus, but these are. Is it over here? Wherever it is, that should be the part that is absolutely sharp, if anything is going to be. We've got this beautiful little line from this leaf in here. This is really some interesting stuff. I think it needs to be cropped down a little bit so you can really concentrate on it. The dark background is cool, but we don't need all that much of it. This could almost become more like a panorama shot where you're really concentrating on the roses. And we don't need all of this out of focus foreground piece. How about here? Do we need all of this? Probably not. So now you can really move in on these roses and see the beauty that's in there. It'd be nice if this one were the one that were really sharp, since it's kind of in the center of everything. But it's a cool concept. I like the idea a lot. There's a lot of emotion in flowers that are beginning to wilt, that were once so beautiful and are now going away. So got a very good idea with this one. This is very cool. Truthfully, I think it's so cool. I'd get another bunch of roses, let them start wilting, shoot them throughout the wilting process, and play with a lot of options. It could give you some really interesting stuff to work with. Okay, let's go on. Oh, well, here's a really interesting portrait. What's that song that was out there, Pretty in Pink, that this definitely says? Interesting. The shot really is here. It's the face, and most especially the eyes. So you've got all this other stuff, and yeah, it's a nice color. You worked with a really interesting reddish pinkish color palette. That worked out really well. But there's only so much of it we need, and some of this is detracting from her face. So what I would do, as we've done on so many of these, is grab this, come in. Now she's got a lot of movement with her face going this way. We don't want to really tighten that up too much. I think I'd get rid of that yellow thing. And I think that would be my shot. Now, her eyes really, really stand out in this very much. You could even consider coming in tighter. And forcing the issue. You don't need to see all of her hair to get a sense of what what the coloration is. And now you're really, really concentrating on her face. So this is something I think I would want to move into and let all the rest of that almost useless real estate go by. Here's where your shot is. And that's very nicely done. The lighting works well. The makeup is fascinating. It's a cool shot. Good job. And here we have our last shot in this group. The surfers, a great angle on the surfers. The only problem I can see is we've almost lost him in the foam. Here we've got some disembodied arms. Your real shot is right here with the surfer coming out of this wave. All this gray water is nice. It definitely lets us know there's a storm, but it's just distracting. Here's where your shot is, really. It's this guy. Now I realized it would take a longer lens than you probably had to do this shot, but when you're looking for this kind of thing, really start concentrating. Where is the shot in my shot? And this is it for this shot. You can really get a sense now of him plowing through the wave of the gray, stormy look. Doesn't look at all fun to be out there. So really think about moving in. Think about where is the shot within my shot. When you're entering something like the fair or a festival or entering something in a juried competition, it's not the judge's job to find your photograph within the photograph. If you have all the rest of it, they're just going to say it's too busy and toss it out. So you get in, you find it. That's your decision. You're the artist. You get to make the decision. Unfortunately, you're the artist. You have to make the decision. Okay, so that's it for this first batch for the best photo thing. Did some really nice work with this. Now we have a benchmark, so it'll be interesting to watch as you move on and get better and better and better with each job. So I'll see you next time. Take care.